y'all, it's Ilana and welcome back to my channel. Elephant in the room, let's address it really quick. My hair is short and there is some bleach and highlights in here. I'm in the process of playing with my hair, which you will see on Friday with the end result. But let's get to the point here. So you clicked on this video because I've been living in Portland, Oregon for almost a month now, and I wanted to share my pros and cons about how I'm feeling about it so far, and maybe comparing some of those pros and cons to San Francisco. If you're new to my channel, hi, welcome. I post content about what it's like to navigate life in and dating in Portland and San Francisco. So if you're thinking about moving to any of those two cities, go ahead and subscribe down below because I think you'll really like it here. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with this video. I like to do things is I like to start off with the negatives and then on a positive note. So I'll start off with the cons first and then do the pros last. I think this is probably going to be the most obvious thing when it comes to Portland is the terrible weather. Ever since I've moved here, it has precipitated every single weekend, and it has made it very hard for me to go out and explore Portland, which is why there hasn't been a lot of me exploring around Portland videos lately, because I haven't been able to do that, and it's driving me mad and crazy. Now, I will say yesterday I was out for a little bit, but I had no intent to film yesterday to do like an explore Portland thing because it still ended up raining after I got home, and it just wasn't going to be enough time for me to be outside filming. So the weather, it rains a lot here. I would say it rains at least 5 times out of the week. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but that's how it's felt since I've been here. And then last weekend, oh, don't even get me started with last weekend, we got 8 inches of snow. What the heck? I mean, I grew up in Virginia, so I was used to snow when we got it in the winter. But California me is feeling a little bit spoiled and being bothered by the snow. But it is what it is. The weather has just been a little bit of a damper, and that can lead into some seasonal affective disorder because everything is so gray and dull and it just kind of dampers your mood. So that's another downside about living in Portland. But when the weather is good, it is very tolerable to walk out. It's usually around like 48 degrees in the winter, which is okay enough to take a walk, and I've done it before already. So that's my take on the weather. I will say San Francisco wins in the weather department here, and Portland's weather is, well, not so good. So the next thing that I feel is a con in Portland is the fact that Portland is not near any kind of large body of water. No oceans, no bays, no big lakes. I mean, there's Lake Oswego, but I heard that's more of a private type lake, and it's not that exciting of a lake to go to compared to a lake such as Lake Tahoe in California or Nevada. We do have water, we just have rivers. When I was growing up in Richmond, Virginia, we have the James River, so there was some body of water that we could go to, especially during the summer, and lay out on some rocks out at like Pony Pasture area. But with Portland, I don't know what kind of river like spots there are to enjoy the river. I'm sure there are some. I just haven't really done a lot of research about it just yet. But I will say rivers, they're okay, but I definitely prefer a real beach compared to a river. So that's another thing that San Francisco has over Portland. I really wish Portland was closer to the coast. That would have been so dope. If there's one thing I've noticed when it comes to calling Ubers and Lyfts here in Portland is that they are a lot more expensive than they are in San Francisco. And I am wondering why, because Portland is more of a car city. Now, you can live in Portland without a car, and I will talk about that in a little bit. In San Francisco, you don't really need a car. You can perfectly rely on public transportation. And you would think that the Ubers would be more expensive because cars aren't as needed to get around. But I noticed when I've taken some Ubers to get around to some parts that public transportation just simply can't get me to, at least in a timely manner, it's about 30 bucks one way, and that's a ton of money. So that's something that I'm not really loving about Portland, that San Francisco definitely takes the cake over, is cheaper ride shares. And this leads me into the next thing about commuting and transportation. We have public transportation, we have the Max line, and then we have the TriMet buses, and keep in mind Max is also part of the TriMet. That's like their transportation system, whereas San Francisco has Muni, or they have BART, which is separate from Muni. But I will say, I do take the public transportation here in Portland. It's been a way for me to get around, and depending on where you want to go in the city, it can take you about an hour and 15 minutes just to commute with public transportation. That is too crazy of a commute, and I would be very exhausted by doing that commute. I think I would want to have a commute for no more than 50 minutes. That's kind of where I want to cap it at. But if I'm trying to go for, let's say, from Southeast Portland to Northeast Portland, all the way at the top close to North Portland, that would take a very long time. So that is one thing that San Francisco has over Portland, is shorter commutes by public transportation. When I'm taking a Muni bus, it will take me about 40 to 50 minutes just to kind of get around the whole entire city. BART is very quick. The Muni trains can get you, depending from where you are in the town, let's say Ocean Beach all the way to downtown. That right there probably takes 40 minutes. If you took the Max, it is a little bit slower than the Muni train, because the Max also doesn't even have like an underground tunnel like the Muni does, which is why the Muni makes that commute faster, because the Muni can actually go at a higher speed than the Max can. San Francisco kind of wins over the public transportation aspect, but I will say Portland's public transportation fares are about, I think, 25 or 50 cents cheaper than San Francisco's. So that's one thing that Portland does have over SF. But overall, I do think that San Francisco has the better public transportation system. One other thing that I'm really not loving about Portland is that I'm seeing a lot of white. It's not very diverse here. I thought Portland was a very diverse city. I'm just very surprised by the fact that Portland is very white and it's not as diverse as I thought it was. I thought Portland was going to be very diverse like San Francisco, but you are seeing people of all different racial backgrounds, ethnicities, and it truly is a melting pot in San Francisco. I would love to see more diversity in Portland. Maybe it's the areas that I'm going to, which is why I'm seeing a lot of white and lack of diversity. I don't know. Again, I've only been here for a month and there's still so much that I haven't gotten to see and do. But that's just been my observation, and that's one that I don't like. So again, San Francisco takes the cake when it comes to diversity. This one is kind of similar to what it would be like in San Francisco, but Portland also has a really big homelessness problem. I am still seeing homelessness wherever I go, especially in the downtown area. Now, I will say, I have seen a difference in some of the patterns and the behaviors of the homeless people here. They're not very aggressive and in your face, and they don't beg as much as the homeless people do in San Francisco. Because let me tell you, some of the homeless people, they can be aggressive. Thing is, I don't really like to talk about homeless people that way. It's just behaviors that I've noticed from both cities. So I've been able to walk past a homeless person and not get catcalled, which has been quite nice. And when I do that in San Francisco, I know that I'm going to get catcalled, and the catcalling there has already been a big problem in SF to begin with. I've talked about that on my channel before. But yeah, I've just noticed the different patterns of the homeless people here. But I will say Portland it still has a pretty big issue here. Apparently Portland still has a housing crisis, believe it or not. But I will say the homelessness is definitely not nearly as bad as it is in San Francisco. So I will say Portland kind of wins in the homelessness area, where it's not as bad as it is in SF. So this one sounds very silly, but if there's something that I've noticed, and this is mostly just through Facebook, and of course everything you see on social media isn't a whole representation of how something is, but I had joined a couple of Portland Facebook housing groups when I was looking for a place to live, and what I've noticed is that there are a lot of people from California trying to move to Portland, or there are people who may be trying to move to Portland from another city, maybe if it's in Oregon or another state. But there are people, I guess, who are native to Portland, and they're commenting saying, why do you want to move to Portland? Or don't come to Portland, we're full. I really hate wars between natives and transplants. It's super toxic and I'm over it. There is a whole nother battle of transplants versus natives in San Francisco. It is a hot ass toxic mess. Maybe one day I'll address that on my channel, but I can tell you the wars between natives and transplants is just disgusting, and I really wish it wasn't even a thing. It's all so I'm tired of it. I can't speak for which one is worse because I think they're both equally bad. And I've just noticed that Oregonians really don't like when people from California move to Oregon. I don't understand why, unless if it's because they think that California people are going to ruin the city, whatever the that means. I don't think I'm ruining any city. I just want to live comfortably and be able to have fun in a cool city that I just moved to. I am not trying to contribute to any kind of gentrification. I understand why people get upset with gentrification, which is why I try to stay away from neighborhoods that have been so gentrified, because then I'm contributing to that and I don't want to contribute to that. So I try to find areas that aren't gentrified or they're areas that anyone can be welcome to go to. At least that's how I feel. Like, I'm a transplant no matter where I move to, and I really don't want to piss somebody off based off what neighborhood I live in. The wars between natives and transplants, it's toxic, but I want to say, comparing it to SF and Portland, they kind of seem the same. Those were all the cons that I mentioned. If you live in Portland, comment down below what cons that you have, especially if you've lived in another city. Maybe you can compare and contrast down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, but please don't be nasty about how you describe it. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, let's move on to the positives or the pros about living in Portland. Let's start off with the most obvious pro that we could possibly talk about when it comes to living in not just Portland, but the state of Oregon. No sales tax. Say it with me again. No sales tax. Oh my God. I am going to be saving so much more money by not having to pay sales tax. This is such an amazing blessing. It's like I can go shopping and the total comes out to be the original price of all of the items. And if I want to go shopping online and I get free shipping, all I have to pay for is, again, the total of all the items that I purchased. It's beautiful. But the one downside to having no sales tax is that our income taxes are a little bit higher, and I actually think they are a little bit higher than California's. So I will say, not having sales tax is definitely way better compared to San Francisco, where there's totally sales tax, and there's a bunch of other crazy taxes within California that are just straight up ridiculous. Not just Portland, but Oregon definitely has that over California, so that's something that I really do like a lot. And I will say, when I have to leave Portland, I will be kind of sad to have to pay sales tax again. I can't lie. So this next one is something that a lot of people will disagree with me on. And coming from California, where I was paying tons of money in rent, but Portland is a much cheaper city to live in. I think Portland is very cheap. I think people living in Portland who work in Portland would definitely disagree with me on this, and they have been saying that Portland has been getting more expensive. And look, I believe them, and I'm not going to invalidate their feelings in any way. I think it's because coming from California, I was paying so much money for a room. When I was living in San Francisco, I can tell you the ranges of rents that I was paying for. $1,100 to $1,650 was the highest amount that I paid for. That's a lot of money. So in my house, there are 4 bedrooms, and all but mine cost $767, and my room cost $900. And with the job that I have right now, making my Bay Area salary, and just so we're clear, I'm still not making 6 figures, but it is enough money for me to easily live comfortably and pay $900. It'd be nice to pay $767, but all the rooms that were available at that price were just a little bit too small for me, and I really wanted something a lot bigger. So I was willing to take the master bedroom and pay $900 because, again, it's something that I could still afford. And I would kill to pay $900 in San Francisco. So Portland definitely takes the cake when it comes to affordable living. I mean, affordable for me, I should say. And this is coming from somebody who is still really poor and still has a lot of debt. Just take that into consideration. Let's move on. So if there's one thing that I'm really digging about Portland, well, I don't want to say digging just yet because there's still so much that I have to explore, but Portland's food, beer, and coffee scene looks like it is going to be off the chain. Now, I don't want to say that Portland food is better than San Francisco food because I think San Francisco will definitely have better Asian and Mexican food compared to Portland. But the desserts here in Portland, oh my God, the desserts. I want to make like a donut video because Portland is just so well known for desserts and donuts, and I love sweets even though I shouldn't love sweets. But I know the food here is definitely going to get me in trouble, and it's going to make me gain weight when I don't want to be gaining weight. I'm trying to maintain my physique. There is a lot of good food, coffee, and beer here, and outdoor dining and outdoor bars is open, which is great because in San Francisco, a lot of bars are not open still. I believe they're still under the purple tier restrictions right now in California, which sucks. And in Portland, at least the gyms are open indoors, and that's so beautiful. If I were to go back to San Francisco, I would stuck working out at home and not making any kind of progress with my physique. So that's another thing that I'm really liking right now. So there's one great thing about Portland is that there's so many opportunities to have fun. And I haven't gotten a chance to do a lot of exploring, as I mentioned, due to the weather, but I cannot wait to kind of do some drives 30 minutes out, do some hikes. I cannot wait to do some hikes once the weather is not so shitty, because Portland is, or not just Portland, but Oregon's just a really great place to enjoy nature. And I can't wait to get started. I want to know when can I do that? Will the weather stop? Because I want to explore and do all of these fun things. It's hard for me to say which activities are better. Right now I'm gonna say San Francisco just because I've done more stuff, but I do believe Portland has tons to offer, so people my age can stay engaged and have a ton of fun while living in a really cool city. One thing that I'm really loving about Portland a ton is that the people are so freaking friendly. I know I said earlier that there's a war between the natives and the transplants, but those are the bitter, angry people who are just very unhappy with their lives, and we don't care about them. Sorry. Everyone that I've interacted with and have talked to has been very nice, very approachable, and just very welcoming in general. And my roommate is very, very friendly. She's not from Portland. She's actually from Sacramento, funny enough. But she's so friendly, and her energy levels match mine, which is something that I really like. But I will say people in San Francisco were very nice too. Here's my take on it. People have mixed feelings about those in San Francisco. I think people in SF can be really mean or really nice depending on who you interact with. But the real thing is people are very good about picking up your energy. If you're kind of just coming across as negative and cynical, people are probably not going to respond very well to that, and they probably won't be as nice to you. Not to say that's right or anything, but people do respond better when your energy is more positive and optimistic and you are just overall happy. Like I said, I think people respond very well to that and they'll be very kind to you. And I remember when I moved to San Francisco, I felt like I was being treated so nicely by random strangers. And people were also saying, well, welcome to San Francisco. Glad to have you here. I'm so happy to hear that you're happy here in SF. And I will say natives in SF take a lot of pride in their city. And they definitely don't like hearing about people shitting on San Francisco. So that will probably make natives hate transplants even more, because transplants only just kind of come to SF for the money and the jobs. They don't come here to actually like want to live in SF. I came to SF because I actually genuinely wanted to live in SF. And again, I will be going back to SF as my living situation in Portland is temporarily. So it's hard for me to say who is nicer. But I will say Portland is really, really freaking friendly. In fact, you know what? I will say Portland has the nicer people. So let's talk about the public transportation system in Portland. I already mentioned how the commutes are long, but I will say I'm not hating Portland's transportation system. I find it to be very reliable. The buses and the MAX trains come on time like they say they're gonna come on time. And the delays, at least for me, haven't been that bad. If a bus is delayed, it's usually by like 2 to 3 minutes. So not even that terrible. Another thing that I like about the buses and the MAX lines in SF is that I find them to be a lot cleaner and maybe even a little bit safer in SF, because there are a lot of sketchy things that can happen on Muni and BART that can make me feel kind of uncomfortable as a woman. And when I'm riding public transportation in Portland, I don't feel that way. I definitely feel like a little bit safer on them. So that's something that I'm really liking. So I will say Portland kind of has it going better than SF when it comes to a safer public transportation system and a cleaner public transportation system as well. And the last thing that I will say about Portland is that it's really easy to get around. I'm still trying to learn directions of Portland, especially with me not having a car. That definitely makes it a lot harder for me. But I've kind of sort of learned how to kind of get onto the freeway from my house, even though I have no desire to ever drive on the freeway. But I'm still obviously learning, but it seems like you can kind of get around Portland within like 20 to 30 minutes by car, so that's really nice. People say that Portland traffic is horrendous, but I don't think it will ever compare to Bay Area or LA traffic. That will always be a hot mess, and people can say Portland's traffic is a nightmare, but they need to come to the Bay Area and Los Angeles and they'll change their mind about that one. If you have any other pros about Portland that you would like to share, maybe comparing it to the city that maybe you used to live in, comment down below. And again, tell me what it is. I'd love to know your thoughts. I definitely am looking forward to making more videos. Hopefully the weather will be nice so I can go ahead and get out and do some more vlogging out in the city and we can explore things together. So for the time being, that's all I have for now. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you give it a thumbs up. And with that, I'll see you in my next one. Bye.